Hey guys, tonight we begin with a chair. Not the throne, that would be too obvious. This chair is smaller, placed just beside it, close enough for the woman sitting there to lean toward the young king. Hear a nervous ambassador, and notice which minister has arrived with a sealed letter hidden inside his sleeve. It looks like the safest seat in the palace. It may be the most dangerous, because the woman in that chair is the king's mother. She helped bring him into the world. She may have protected his claim, guided his education, and kept frightened adults from tearing his government apart before he understood what they wanted. But the moment she becomes powerful enough to protect the throne, everyone around it begins asking a darker question. Does she still serve the king? Or has she begun to rule him? The title changed from one court to another. Queen Dowager, Regent, Mahd-e Sultan, Ioba, Senior Royal Widow. We are using Queen Mother as the doorway into the story, not pretending that every palace created the same office. What joined these women was a political contradiction. Their authority could be enormous, but almost none of it was securely their own. A royal mother might control access to the ruler, recommend ministers, supervise the household, receive ambassadors, or govern while her son was still a child. Yet every decision was supposed to be made in his name. It was absolute power, with the small administrative inconvenience that officially, absolutely none of it belonged to you. And royal courts were very interested in administrative inconveniences, especially when those inconveniences had relatives, servants, money, and opinions. If quiet history about royal families turning motherhood into a government crisis is good company tonight, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which palace job you would refuse first. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the throne room before the first audience of the day. The floor has been swept, heavy fabric hangs along the walls. Guards stand near a door that opens only for people with permission. A clerk holds folded documents against his chest, each carrying a request, appointment, warning, or carefully disguised demand. At the centre of the room sits a boy. One shoe does not quite touch the floor. A cuff has been folded back because it is too long. The crown is adjusted before the doors open. Everyone bows to him anyway. His mother sits nearby. Nobody can afford to forget that she is not the sovereign. Nobody can afford to behave as though she is unimportant. That balance explains why her position could become so powerful. A child king created an immediate practical problem. Kingdoms and courts did not pause while a ruler learned to read difficult reports, or recognize which smiling uncle was preparing a rebellion. Taxes still had to be collected. Governors had to be chosen. Soldiers expected pay. Foreign rulers continued sending letters that sounded polite, because threats usually dress well before entering a palace. Someone had to decide which matters reached the child first. Someone had to explain what the ministers were asking. Someone had to know which servant could be trusted near his rooms, which tutor might shape his loyalties, and which relative had suddenly become much too helpful. The king's mother often seemed like the natural answer. She had a personal interest in keeping him alive. His survival protected her status, household, and family. If he was very young, she might know his moods, illnesses, and habits better than any council member. She could appear to stand above competing ministers because her loyalty was supposed to be maternal rather than factional. That was the theory. The theory usually lasted until she made her first appointment. The instant she recommended one official, another lost an opportunity. If she trusted one commander, his rival began counting the guards outside her apartments. If she promoted a servant who had remained loyal during the succession crisis, established nobles could complain that household favourites were governing the palace. Every ally made her safer. Every ally also created someone who wanted her influence reduced. Power at court rarely arrived wearing a sign that said power. It arrived as access. A messenger was allowed through one door, but not another. A petition was placed on top of the pile. A visitor received 10 private minutes before the formal audience. A sealed note reached the king after supper, when the council was no longer present to explain what it supposedly meant. The royal mother did not need to issue a public command to shape a decision. She might only need to decide who entered the room. This was why her household mattered. The attendants around her were not decorative figures behind curtains. They carried messages, managed money, arranged meetings, controlled keys, and knew when the king was tired, ill, or willing to hear bad news. A palace could have grand councils and impressive ceremonies. It could also be redirected by one person saying softly that His Majesty was not receiving anyone this morning. The door remained closed. The government waited outside. The mother could not simply announce that access gave her political power. Her authority had to appear protective, temporary, and loyal. She was caring for her son. She was preserving order. She was helping until he could act alone. Sometimes that was exactly what she believed. The difficulty is that history rarely preserves belief as clearly as it preserves conflict. We often have official letters, hostile reports, court chronicles, accusations, appointments, and names of people removed. We have fewer honest records of what a royal mother thought after a council meeting, when protecting her child and protecting her position had become difficult to separate. So we should be careful. Not every queen mother sought control. Not every son resented his mother. Not every court treated maternal authority in the same way. A French regent, an Ottoman valide sultan, a Korean queen dowager, and the Idia of Benin belong to different political worlds. But across those differences, one pattern appears again and again. Closeness to the ruler created influence. Influence attracted dependence. Dependence formed a household. A household could become a faction. And once a faction formed around the king's mother, her enemies could claim that the seat beside the throne was beginning to look permanent. The accusation was dangerous because she could not answer it too forcefully. If she denied having influence, she looked dishonest. If she openly defended her authority, she appeared ambitious. If she withdrew, her allies could lose office, and her son could fall under another faction's control. If she stayed, every decision added another mark to the case against her. This was borrowed sovereignty. She could use the machinery of rule, but she did not own it. She could hold the seal, but it carried her son's name. She could speak first in council, but final authority was supposed to come from him. She could preserve the dynasty during his childhood, then discover that his adulthood required proving he no longer needed her. The job contained its own expiration date, and that expiration date was a living person. For now, the boy remains on the throne. His mother remains nearby. The clerk is still holding the folded documents. Beyond the guarded entrance, ministers are waiting to learn whose advice will reach the king first. One of them has already understood the true shape of the court. The crown may be on the boy's head, but this morning, the person controlling the route toward him holds the stronger hand. That stronger hand did not begin near a council chamber. Long before a royal mother could decide who entered the king's room, she had to survive a quieter contest around a cradle. Curtains were drawn, physicians spoke carefully, attendants counted months. Every small breath carried more political weight than its wooden frame should reasonably have held. Some women entered royal households as princess brides carrying treaties in their luggage. Others arrived as consorts, concubines, captives, or enslaved palace women whose status changed only after a ruler favoured them or a son survived. The doorway differed. The pressure gathering around a possible heir could become equally political. In many dynastic systems, a royal woman was expected to produce children. More specifically, she was often expected to produce the child the succession required. A daughter could be valuable. She might secure another alliance, inherit under certain laws, become central to a later succession, or carry dynastic claims across borders. But in courts organized around male inheritance, attention settled heavily on the birth of a surviving son. Surviving mattered as much as son. Infant and childhood mortality remained high. A prince who lived for a few weeks did not secure anyone's future. His mother experienced the uncertainty in her body before it reached any council paper. Waiting for pregnancy. Waiting through childbirth. Waiting while attendants listened for the infant to cry. Waiting through fever, coughing, and every ordinary childhood danger that became extraordinary when the child might inherit a state. In one room, an attendant loosens the fabric around a cradle because the air has grown too warm. Outside, two clerks are already preparing different announcements. One assumes a prince, the other leaves space for a princess. Neither document contains anything about the mother's exhaustion. The cradle was not simply furniture. It was a possible government that made everyone around it political. The nurse, physician, tutor, guard, wet nurse, chamber attendant, and household officer stood near someone who might one day distribute offices, forgive debts, command armies, and remember who had treated him kindly. Their work could be intimate and repetitive, feeding, washing, dressing, recording medicine, keeping rooms warm, sleeping near a door. It could also become dangerous. A nurse who noticed an illness first might influence which physician was summoned. A guard could decide whether a visitor reached the child. A tutor could shape his religious outlook or his opinion of a particular family. None of these people needed to be secret masterminds. Most were doing recognizable work under exhausting conditions. Yet proximity accumulated value. A mother who wished to protect her son had to care about appointments around him. She did not want a careless physician, a disloyal guard, or a tutor serving another faction. The moment she placed trusted people near the child, she also built the earliest form of a political network. It did not look like government. It looked like a nursery at 3 a.m. This is where the familiar image of the endlessly ambitious royal woman can mislead us. Later chroniclers often began the story after she had acquired influence. They saw a household filled with loyal clients and assumed that every relationship had been designed from the first day as a climb toward power. The evidence rarely permits that confidence. Some royal mothers clearly calculated. Others responded to danger as it appeared. For many, the line between protecting a child and protecting a faction could vanish because the child's survival depended upon that faction. A prince without supporters was vulnerable. A prince with supporters had enemies. His mother inherited both. The risks varied by institution. In some courts, a lawful wife possessed a status distinct from a favoured consort. In others, the mother of a reigning son could rise above women who had entered the household before her. Some dynasties emphasized seniority. Others allowed a ruler to designate an heir. Elsewhere, succession depended upon negotiation among relatives, officials, soldiers, chiefs, or ritual authorities. There was no single royal nursery shared by all history. But the physical uncertainty could look strangely similar. A servant carries hot water along a corridor. A physician leaves without smiling. A senior woman waits for news while her hands remain still, because too many people are watching. Officials outside pretend the birth is a private family matter, or dispatch riders prepare for several possible outcomes. If the child is a daughter, one set of calculations begins. If the child is a son, another begins before the room has cooled. Celebration itself exposed hierarchy. Who announced the birth? Which bells rang? Which gifts were sent? Where was the mother housed afterward? Did the ruler visit publicly? Was the child presented in a way that confirmed legitimacy? Ceremony did more than welcome a baby. It informed the court how seriously to take him. And therefore how seriously to take his mother. She might receive better rooms, greater income, more attendants, and increased ceremonial respect. People who had barely noticed her could suddenly discover that they had always admired her judgment. Gifts arrived. Distant relatives remembered the road to the palace. Because history enjoys making basic affection complicated, every expression of loyalty now carried a possible future invoice. The new mother had to accept support without appearing to build a party around her child. She had to defend his interests without openly treating the ruler's other children as threats. She had to remain courteous toward women whose sons might one day compete with hers. And she had to do this while recovering from childbirth. Royal status could provide attendants, physicians, food, warm rooms, and protection unavailable to most women. It did not make pregnancy or birth safe. It did not prevent infection, hemorrhage, or grief. Nor did it allow a royal mother to experience loss entirely in private. The death of a child could be personal devastation and political collapse at the same time. Servants might be dismissed. Alliances could weaken. A rival household could rise. The mother's rooms might become quieter, not only because she was mourning, but because fewer people now needed anything from her. Attention followed possibility. When the child lived, attention intensified. He was watched at meals, in lessons, and during ceremonies. A tutor praised by the boy might gain influence. A mother's decision to exclude someone could later be described as protective wisdom or jealous control, depending on who wrote the account. The child had not ruled anything. His surroundings were already a map of future conflict. The mother learnt that safety required knowledge. Who visited the nursery? Which servant spoke to whom? What rumours were circulating? Was a ceremonial slight merely rude or deliberately political? The institution offered enough genuine reasons to pay attention. A missing guard, a changed tutor, a delayed allowance, a noble family suddenly supporting another prince, a ruler who stopped visiting her rooms. Each detail could signal that the promise inside the cradle was weakening. Producing an heir did not complete a royal woman's task. It began a longer test. The child had to survive, preserve his legitimacy, gather support, and eventually inherit. His mother's rank rose and fell with that progress. She did not yet control the route into a council chamber. For now, she had something smaller. A hand resting on the edge of a cradle while, beyond the curtains, the palace quietly calculated what that child, and therefore what his mother, might one day be worth. The hand resting on the cradle could spend years waiting for one particular sound. A hurried knock on a bedroom door. The old king is dying. Until that moment, the prince is a possibility. After it, he may become a government before sunrise. Royal death was personal, ceremonial, religious, and political all at once. A wife might lose her husband. A child might lose his father. Servants might grieve for someone they had attended for decades. Outside the sick room, officials were already thinking about seals, proclamations, guards, gates, and the order in which the news should travel. A monarch's death created a gap between one unquestioned command and the next. Even where succession law appeared clear, the gap invited rumour, panic, opportunism, and armed intervention. If two claimants existed, every hour mattered. If the heir was young, every adult standing near him suddenly mattered too. The royal mother now faced the most dangerous night of her life. Imagine the palace corridor. Footsteps approach the sick room and stop. A physician has run out of reassuring phrases. Somewhere nearby, a chapel bell sounds once. Guards receive instructions, though perhaps not all from the same person. A locked chest containing the royal seal is brought closer to the officials who expect to need it. One door separates private death from public succession. Who stands near that door matters. Who enters matters. Who leaves with a message matters more. The king may already be dead, while most of the palace still behaves as though he is alive. That delay is not always a conspiracy. Confirmation may be required. Ritual must be observed. A council has to assemble. The heir must be located and protected. But controlled silence becomes political power very quickly. If the wrong person learns first, he may reach the treasury, barracks, or city gates before the official proclamation. If a rival prince has supporters, they may move him into a stronger position. If the army is uncertain, commanders may wait to see which household controls the palace. The mother cannot remain politely in her rooms while someone else explains what happened. Her first task is not to govern. It is to make sure her son is still reachable. A young prince may be asleep in another wing, studying with tutors, travelling with attendants, or surrounded by servants whose loyalties are not perfectly known. The mother needs trusted people near him. She needs the guards to recognize his claim. She needs access to the seal, or to the officials who control it. She needs enough senior figures to accept the succession before another story forms. The nursery household becomes an emergency government. The nurse who once listened for the child's breathing now keeps strangers from his room. The servant who carried lessons carries a sealed instruction. A tutor may become a witness to the prince's readiness. The officer assigned to protect him may determine whether the palace changes rulers peacefully. One guard has been awake for most of the night. His knees ache beneath ceremonial clothing, but he cannot sit. Every person approaching the corridor asks whether the door is open. He has received 2 orders from 2 senior men. Only one can be obeyed. Official accounts often preserve royal transitions as orderly sequences. The king died, the heir was proclaimed, mourning began, government continued. The polished record hides the waiting, confusion, whispered argument, and physical fatigue that made the order possible. A mother's strength on this night depended upon preparation she was not supposed to describe as preparation. If she had cultivated allies, she might secure the succession quickly. If she had avoided politics completely, she might discover that another faction had been preparing on her behalf, or against her, for years. The trap was already closing. Act decisively, and later writers could say she seized power over her husband's body. Move too slowly, and her son might lose the crown. Even mourning could become suspicious. If she wept openly, observers might call her weak or theatrical. If she remained composed, they might decide she had expected the death and perhaps desired it. Courts were generous in providing women with impossible standards and then documenting their failure to meet them. The dying ruler's chamber, clothing, final words, religious rites, and supposed wishes could all support competing claims. A statement remembered by one attendant might become evidence that the king favoured a particular regent. A document produced after death might be accepted, challenged, or quietly misplaced. The mother had to move through that uncertainty, knowing her own version might never dominate the record. Some transitions were governed by established procedures. Councils gathered. Senior relatives were consulted. Officials followed precedent. Procedure did not remove politics. It gave politics a formal route. In 15th century Chosŏn Korea, royal succession could bring senior dowager queens into direct contact with the highest officials of the state. During the crisis that led to King Seongjong's accession, Queen Dowager Cheonghee became central to the choice of the next ruler. Messages moved between palace halls. Officials sought a decision from the senior royal woman able to speak with dynastic authority. She did not simply whisper a preference while helpless men waited outside. The court was using an institution under pressure. Officials had concerns. Royal relatives had claims. Precedent and rank mattered. The Dowager Queen's place within the household gave her authority the bureaucracy could not manufacture for itself. A messenger crossed a courtyard with a folded question. He waited outside another hall, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, while attendants carried the paper inward. An answer returned. Somewhere between those buildings, a family decision became a state decision. That distinction is useful because royal mothers did not always gain power by breaking rules. Sometimes the rules, customs, or precedents required them to act. The danger came afterward, when the decision had produced winners and losers. The prince who became king gained a throne. Another prince did not. Officials who supported the successful choice could expect trust. Those who preferred another outcome would remember. A queen dowager could complete the succession successfully and still begin the new reign surrounded by resentment. Now return to the original corridor. The old king's chamber is quiet. The message has finally been released. Bells sound. Officials bow. Servants begin replacing fabrics and arranging grief into visible order. Mourning cloth passes from hand to hand. A tired attendant pricks her finger on a fastening and continues working. Somewhere nearby, a child is dressed as a king. Adults lower their bodies when he enters. Men who yesterday addressed him as a prince now wait for commands carrying his name. The rooms have not changed, but every entrance means something different. His mother changes too. Yesterday, she was the ruler's wife, widow in waiting, or mother of an heir. Today, she may be a regent, queen dowager, valide sultan, or another culturally specific form of senior dynastic authority. The title sounds like security. In reality, it is a list of responsibilities written over a field of enemies. Her son is on the throne, but the old king's death has removed the man who once stood between her and every faction now gathering around the child. The cradle is behind her. Ahead is a council room full of adults who all agree that the young king must be protected. They disagree only about who must protect him from whom. The doors open. The doors open onto a room designed for adults. Long tables, heavy chairs, ink drying in shallow dishes. Men who have spent decades learning how to speak for several minutes without admitting what they actually want. At one end sits the young king. A secretary places a document in front of him and turns it so the writing faces the correct direction. The boy takes up a pen. A dark line appears along one finger where the ink has touched his skin. The paper concerns an appointment. A provincial office has become vacant. 2 candidates possess experience, family connections, and excellent opinions of themselves. One supported the young king's succession immediately. The other waited until the outcome became clear. The first candidate has the Queen Mother's confidence. The second has powerful friends in the council. The child can read their names. That does not mean he understands what choosing one will do. This was the practical weakness hidden inside the beautiful image of hereditary monarchy. A crown could pass in a moment. Experience could not. A boy might become king because his father died, because older brothers had died, because officials accepted him, or because his supporters reached the necessary doors first. Whatever the route, the state expected him to perform adulthood on command. He had to receive ambassadors, approve appointments, hear disputes, reward loyalty, and recognize danger. He had to understand why one nobleman's request for a modest office had somehow arrived with 300 armed supporters. For a child, government required translation. The translation could come from tutors, counsellors, ministers, senior relatives, household officers, or a formally appointed regency. It could also come from his mother, seated close enough to explain why the document was not merely about filling a vacancy. It was about who controlled revenue, which family gained a foothold in the province, which commander would be offended, which disappointed man might remember the decision during the next crisis. She does not seize the paper. That would make everything too obvious. Instead, she asks 3 questions. Who proposed the first candidate? Who guarantees the second? Which of them supplied men during the succession? The room changes. Officials who arrive prepared to discuss merit now have to discuss memory. The boy hears that one candidate hesitated when his claim was uncertain. The other sent guards before being asked. He looks at his mother, then at the document. Outside the chamber, the rejected candidate waits on a bench beneath an unheated window. His legs have gone stiff. A servant has passed twice without offering any information. The decision will reach him after it is signed. By evening, he will be telling friends that the king's mother has captured the government. That single appointment reveals the central problem. At first, maternal guidance looked reassuring. The previous ruler was gone, but the dynasty had not become an empty suit of clothing sitting at the council table. The young king had someone near him who remembered the succession and knew which men had been loyal when loyalty was expensive. In France, a queen mother could serve openly as regent during her son's minority. Her authority might be set out through legal arrangements, council practice, and political acceptance. In the Ottoman court, the mother of the reigning sultan operated through a different institution. Rank, access, household networks, and relationships with officials could give her immense influence without turning her into a French-style regent. The forms differed. The practical question did not. A ruler was present, but unable to govern alone. His mother became part of the bridge between the crown and the machinery beneath it. Sometimes the bridge was visible in documents, A regency council had named members. Orders were issued under recognised authority. The Queen Mother presided, negotiated, or governed in the king's name. Elsewhere, influence moved through conversation, timing, household access, and recommendation. The paper might carry only the king's signature, while the discussion that shaped it remained unrecorded. That uneven evidence later produced two histories. Supporters remembered wise maternal counsel. Enemies remembered secret domination. The same afternoon could support both. The secretary is still waiting. The young king's hand has begun to cramp around the pen. His mother asks whether he understands what the successful candidate will control. He gives an answer. Perhaps it is his own judgment. Perhaps it reflects her explanation. Most likely, the distinction is already becoming impossible to measure. The paper is signed. Necessity has begun turning into habit. Officials learned that a proposal is more likely to succeed if the Queen Mother has heard it first. They begin visiting her rooms before council. They send gifts to people near her household. They ask servants when she is willing to receive difficult news. The arrangement remains temporary, one of history's favourite names for something becoming normal. The boy learns from it too. He notices which ministers bow to his mother. He sees them change their language when she enters. At first, he may repeat her judgment because he trusts her. Later, he may repeat it because no one has shown him a different route. Eventually, he may resent the assumption that her judgment will come before his. During the early years, dependence feels ordinary. A tutor enters with a lesson in law, religion, languages, warfare, or royal conduct. Choosing what a king studies helps shape what kind of ruler he may become. A martial tutor emphasizes command. A clerical advisor emphasizes duty. A scholar emphasizes precedent. A household selected by the mother can teach the king not only how to govern, but whom to trust while governing. Education becomes another political room. A map spread under a candle. A practice signature. A history lesson in which one rebellious uncle receives suspiciously detailed attention. The mother who supervises these lessons may honestly believe she is preparing her son for independence. Her opponents may believe she is preparing him to depend upon her allies. Both interpretations can grow from the same desk. Morning audiences follow lessons. Meals place carefully selected companions near the ruler. Religious ceremonies create another route to his ear. Private conversations before sleep become part of political education. The child does not govern only while sitting on the throne. His government forms through the people permitted to explain the world to him. That gives his mother extraordinary responsibility. It also makes her increasingly visible. The more successfully she prevents confusion, the more ministers route confusion through her. The more effectively she stabilizes the court, the more her household becomes a political center. The more often she guides the king's hand toward the correct line, the harder it becomes to prove that the hand is truly his. The secretary lifts the signed appointment. In the corridor, the waiting candidate hears footsteps and stands too quickly. He straightens his clothing before the answer arrives. The chosen man will receive an office. The rejected man will receive a story about why he lost. And before long, the real struggle will not be over what the child signs. It will be over who is allowed to place the next document in front of him. The next document does not move by itself. Someone folds it. Someone carries it through a corridor where two guards decide whether the messenger has permission to continue. A clerk places it among other papers. A chamber servant knows whether the king is resting, eating, praying, studying, or already tired of men explaining that their request is urgent. By the time the page reaches the royal hand, half the decision may already have been made. This was the quiet power of access. A monarchy could produce magnificent ceremonies around authority. Crowns, banners, thrones, trumpets, formal councils, and processions announced that power belonged to the ruler. Daily government also depended upon smaller things: a door opening, a name added to a list, a message delivered before supper rather than after it. The person controlling those moments did not need to command an army. Sometimes she only needed a household that knew the route. Depending on the court, that household might include ladies in waiting, chamber attendants, scribes, guards, treasurers, nurses, pages, messengers, eunuchs, stewards, physicians, confessors, and relatives in useful positions. Their tasks could look domestic. They arranged clothing, meals, rooms, journeys, religious observance, gifts, and visitors. Yet royal courts did not maintain a clean border between domestic life and politics. The ruler lived inside the institution of government. A servant who could enter a private chamber possessed a route unavailable to many officials with impressive titles. That did not make every attendant a secret minister. Most were working, waiting, carrying, accounting, cleaning, guarding, or trying not to become involved in disputes above their rank. Working near power is one of the easiest ways to become involved in it. One chamber servant carries a ring of metal keys attached to her belt. By evening, the weight has rubbed a mark into the cloth. She can open a door that a duke must wait outside, but that authority belongs to her employer, not to her. If the household falls, the same keys may be taken from her before breakfast. Imagine a nobleman arriving before dawn. He has ridden through bad weather because a governorship is about to become vacant. He wishes to explain why his family has always served the crown loyally, a fact he has rediscovered with remarkable precision now that a salary is available. He cannot simply walk into the king's room. First, he speaks to an officer. The officer sends him to a clerk. The clerk says the schedule is full. The nobleman then remembers that his wife's cousin knows one of the royal mother's attendants. A message changes hands. A gift may appear. Nothing dramatic happens. No one announces that the government has been corrupted. By afternoon, his name is on tomorrow's audience list. Access often looked like this. Not a single command, but a chain of relationships turning distance into proximity. Petitioners needed a path toward the ruler. The Queen Mother benefited because her household could provide one. Her attendants benefited because service near her created opportunities for intercession, employment, protection, or reward. Soon her apartments developed their own gravity. Officials came to explain themselves before appearing in council. Diplomats tried to learn which gifts would be received favourably. Families sought positions for sons, daughters, brothers, and cousins. People who had once ignored a chamber attendant became suddenly fascinated by her health. A servant with a cough could discover that half the aristocracy wished her a rapid recovery. It was touching, in a heavily budgeted sort of way. Access also meant control of time. A request heard early could shape every later discussion. A warning delivered before council could determine which questions the king asked. A letter arriving after his mother had spoken with him might be read through the explanation she had already provided. Timing could make accurate information look suspicious or false information look reasonable. Suppose news arrives from a province. A local official reports unrest. One faction says the cause is taxation. Another says religion. A commander insists that a rival has exaggerated the danger to obtain troops and money. The king cannot travel there before breakfast. He must decide through reports. Who chooses which report reaches him first? Who explains the unfamiliar names? Who reminds him that one governor supported his succession while another hesitated? The Queen Mother may never write the final order. She may only help organize the story through which the order becomes sensible. Enemies can call that manipulation. Allies can call it experience. The paperwork preserves the decision more clearly than the conversation. This makes informal influence difficult to measure. A surviving letter may ask a Queen Mother to intercede, proving that someone believed she possessed access. It does not always prove that she granted the request or controlled the outcome. A hostile account may accuse attendants of selling audiences. It may describe real abuse, political exaggeration, or an irritated official discovering that other people also had relatives. What remains clear is that access had value, and value attracted competition. The royal household therefore watched itself. Letters were sealed. Visitors were noted. Keys were counted. Account books recorded food, wages, candles, clothing, repairs, horses, and gifts. A messenger might sleep near a corridor because news could arrive before dawn. A clerk's hand cramped while copying the same instructions several times for different provinces. An attendant waited through a meal she could smell but not join because the Queen Mother might call. The labour behind influence was repetitive and mostly invisible until something failed. A large household also required money. More attendants meant more messages could travel. More guards meant greater independence. More gifts meant more obligations. More rooms meant more private meetings. The household budget became a map of political reach. Opponents understood this. They could reduce income, dismiss servants, replace guards, move the Queen Mother's residence, or restrict communication with the king. Such measures could be presented as economy, reform, or proper household order. Conveniently, good housekeeping and political disarmament often use the same list of dismissed employees. A reduced household loses more than ceremony. It loses eyes, ears, horses, hands, and people willing to wait outside doors. Lower-ranking workers also carried the greatest personal risk. A foreign-born attendant could become a target during xenophobic tension. A trusted messenger might be questioned or banished after delivering an instruction powerful people disliked. A servant who had opened the correct door for years could be remembered only on the day someone accused her of opening the wrong one. The record names the failure more readily than the labour. By evening, the king has received visitors, heard reports, and signed papers. The council believes the day's business is complete. The Queen Mother's rooms remain active. A lamp burns beside a table. A clerk prepares a reply. Someone reports that a minister left the council angry. Another says the commander requesting money has spoken privately with a rival prince. She listens. Each piece of information may help protect her son. Each draws her deeper into government. Beyond the guarded rooms, those denied access form their own explanation for the closed route. They do not see the aching feet, copied letters, unpaid wages, or servants waiting through the night. They see only that the king is inside, and another household determines who reaches him. Soon they will stop asking for entry. They will begin calculating what it costs. The cost was rarely paid in coins alone. A petitioner might bring a gift, promise loyalty, offer useful information, or recommend a relative for service. A commander who supported the young king during a succession crisis might later expect the governorship. A clerk who carried dangerous letters at midnight might hope that his son would receive a modest office once the palace became calm again. This was how protection turned into patronage. The Queen Mother could not preserve her son's government with goodwill and careful posture. She needed people who would obey when the ruler was too young, ill, or isolated to enforce decisions himself. She needed officials who recognized his claim, guards who defended his rooms, treasurers who released money, and messengers who continued riding after the road became unsafe. Loyalty required maintenance. Sometimes that meant praise and ceremony. Often it meant employment. A name appeared on an appointment list. Beside it was an office, salary, residence, tax privilege, military command, or place in the household. To the person receiving it, the line might represent stability for an entire family. To the person passed over, it represented proof that the king's mother had chosen a side. The page could be short and still create enemies faster than a banquet seating plan. Imagine two officials waiting in an antechamber. Both claim long service. Both have relatives at court. Both insist that the vacant post must go to someone experienced, by which each means himself. One receives the office. He bows, promises gratitude, and leaves with a new title. The other also bows. Courts encouraged excellent posture during personal disasters. By evening, the disappointed man is explaining to friends that the appointment reveals a dangerous conspiracy around the throne. He may believe it. Patronage did not need to be corrupt to become factional. Governments had limited offices, incomes, commands, and honours. Choosing one qualified person still meant rejecting another. Where employment carried rank and protection, losing could feel like political exclusion rather than ordinary disappointment. At what point does rewarding loyalty become corruption? Usually at the exact point when the reward goes to someone else. The Queen Mother's household was especially vulnerable to accusations of favoritism because her authority rested partly on personal relationships. Her brother might receive a command. A cousin might enter the council. A servant who protected the young king could be promoted. A physician trusted during a childhood illness might gain unusual access. Each reward could be defended by itself. Together, they could look like a private family building itself inside the state. Maternal relatives presented a particular problem. They could give the royal mother support independent of her husband's dynasty. They knew her before she entered the palace. They might provide money, soldiers, advice, or refuge. They could also be ambitious, careless, expensive, and deeply impressed by their connection to the throne. A queen mother could discover that the fastest way to acquire enemies was to have a brother who had recently learned the phrase, His Majesty's uncle. If she refused to help her relatives, she risked losing people whose loyalty was personal rather than ceremonial. If she advanced them too openly, opponents could claim that an outside family had captured the monarchy. The danger sharpened when she had been born in another kingdom, region, religion, ethnic community, or political house. A marriage that once represented alliance could later be described as contamination. Her accent became suspicious. Letters to her birth family became evidence. Relatives became invaders with good clothing. The accusation did not need to be fair. It needed only to gather people already unhappy with appointments. Military support made the network more dangerous. A young ruler required protection. Palace guards, commanders, elite troops, and provincial forces could determine whether his succession survived. His mother needed relationships with men who controlled weapons. But a soldier's loyalty was rarely an abstract emotion floating above wages and promotion. Units expected pay. Commanders expected recognition. Factions within an army could attach themselves to ministers, princes, or royal households. Reward one military group and the corridor outside the king's rooms becomes safer. Across the city, another commander notices. Now imagine the treasury. A clerk opens a ledger. Payments to the Queen Mother's household have increased. More guards require wages. More messengers require horses. Loyal officials expect salaries. Ceremonies, gifts, clothing, food, and residences consume money. The figures can be legitimate. They also look alarming in neat columns. An opponent does not need to accuse her of treason. He can begin with economy. The household is too large. The gifts are excessive. The appointments are inefficient. The guards are unnecessary. The language sounds responsible, which is why budget reform has always been such a comfortable coat for political attack. Reducing expenditure might genuinely help the treasury. It might also remove the servants, guards, and clients who allow the Queen Mother to act independently. A dismissed officer loses his wage. A reduced household loses information. A relative sent away loses access. One financial decision can quietly disarm a political network without anyone drawing a sword. She understands this. She may defend the household because the staff perform necessary work, because her dignity requires visible rank, or because losing them would leave both her and the king exposed. Usually, the motives cannot be separated cleanly. That ambiguity makes patronage useful to hostile storytellers. Every protective measure can be described as selfish. Every appointment can become corruption. Every loyal servant can be called a creature of the Queen Mother. Sometimes the accusation is accurate. Royal households did enrich relatives. Favourites did sell access. Offices did go to people whose strongest qualification was knowing the correct bedroom door. But the opposite mistake is just as easy. Assuming that every person connected to a powerful royal woman proves the existence of a secret personal regime. A ruler needed a network. A minister needed one. A military commander needed one. The Queen Mother needed one too, but hers was judged through the language of household intimacy. Her faction could be made to sound less like government and more like something spreading from private rooms. Meanwhile, people far from the palace paid in less elegant forms. A governor appointed through court patronage might collect revenue aggressively to repay debts. Soldiers waiting for wages might take food locally. A factional purge could remove experienced officials with corrupt ones. Provincial communities could experience a palace quarrel as a new tax, a requisitioned horse, or grain leaving a village storehouse. The woman near the throne might never see the emptied sack, yet the chain could begin with a favour granted in her rooms. This did not make her uniquely guilty. It revealed how court protection transferred costs outward. Comfort near the sovereign was often purchased with labour far beyond the walls. By now, the appointment list has grown crowded. Some names belong to capable officials, some to loyal servants, some to relatives who should probably have remained at home. Each strengthens the government around the young king. Each gives an excluded rival a reason to join someone else. Slowly, the household stops looking like a collection of favours. It begins to look like a faction. Outside the apartments, men who dislike one another discover a shared principle. The king should govern without maternal interference. It is a noble principle. It is also, rather conveniently, the principle most likely to give them her offices. Once maternal interference became the official problem, her enemies needed more than complaints about appointments. They needed a story simple enough to travel. The story usually sounded like this. The king was young, weak, confused or misled. His mother controlled him. That explanation protected the idea of monarchy. If a royal decision failed, the problem did not have to be the king, the law, the army, the treasury, or the men advising him. Responsibility could be moved sideways onto the woman near the throne. She had whispered. She had interfered. She had placed relatives above the kingdom. An unpopular tax became her greed. A failed appointment became her favoritism. A peace settlement became feminine weakness. A war became private vengeance. The court did not need evidence for every part of the story. Repetition did much of the work. A diplomat wrote that the Queen Mother dominated her son. A hostile minister repeated it. A chronicler copied the minister. A printed pamphlet carried the accusation into streets and taverns, where no one had attended the council meeting that inspired it. Years later, historians discovered several men agreeing and mistook agreement for independent proof. By then, the chair beside the throne had acquired a criminal record. The language used against politically active royal mothers drew from familiar fears. A woman who spoke firmly was overbearing. A woman who negotiated carefully was deceptive. A woman who protected her children was possessive. A woman who failed to protect them was unnatural. Foreign birth added another layer. Many queens entered courts through diplomatic marriage. They arrived with another language, different customs, relatives, servants, religious practices, or political connections. While relations between kingdoms remained useful, those differences could be described as elegance, education, and alliance. When relations deteriorated, the same differences became evidence that she had never truly belonged. Her accent grew louder in hostile accounts. Her relatives became agents. Her correspondence became a foreign plot, even when male rulers exchanged letters across borders every day, without anyone suggesting that handwriting itself was treason. Catherine de Medici lived inside this kind of suspicion. Born into the Medici family in Florence, she married into the French royal dynasty. During much of her husband Henry II's reign, she did not dominate government. After his death, France passed through the reigns of their sons amid severe religious and political conflict. Her position changed. As the mother of young or politically vulnerable kings, Catherine became central to preserving the Valois monarchy. She negotiated with nobles, participated in policy, managed factions, and attempted to hold together a kingdom divided by religion and aristocratic rivalry. The result was not a quiet reputation. To supporters, she could appear practical, patient, and committed to the dynasty. To enemies, she became the foreign mother behind a weak line of kings. Once that image formed, almost any disaster could be drawn toward her. The popular Catherine accumulated poisons, secret passages, astrologers, hidden blades, and a nearly supernatural ability to arrange catastrophe from a private chamber. It is an effective character for a novel. It is less useful as an explanation of 16th century France. The evidence is more difficult. Catherine exercised power. Her decisions could be harsh. She participated in a world where violence was real, religious conflict severe, and royal survival often placed above mercy. Careful history does not require turning her into an innocent spectator. It also does not require accepting every hostile story told about an Italian-born queen governing through her sons. The image of the poisoner is revealing. Poison was imagined as private, hidden, and intimate. It moved through food, medicine, servants, and closed rooms. That made it a perfect accusation against a royal woman whose influence already operated through household access. An army leaves tracks. Poison leaves a story. If a courtier died unexpectedly, rumour entered the gap before evidence. If Catherine benefited politically, the rumour gained purpose. If she did not benefit, a determined narrator could usually invent a deeper purpose. The accusation did more than say she killed. It said she governed in a feminine, concealed, unnatural way. That language allowed opponents to contrast supposedly open masculine authority with secret female influence. Though male ministers also used confidential agents, bribes, surveillance, family networks, and private letters. Apparently, secrecy became more alarming when the curtains matched the upholstery. Religious conflict sharpened the portrait. France was divided among Catholics, Protestants, royal officials, noble houses, provincial interests, and armed factions. Policies shifted as the crown tried to survive changing pressures. Negotiation could be interpreted as betrayal. Concession could look like weakness. Repression generated retaliation. Catherine stood close enough to these decisions to receive blame from several directions at once. A Catholic critic might accuse her of tolerating heresy. A Protestant critic might accuse her of deception and persecution. A noble house might resent support for a rival. Foreign observers could interpret French instability through stereotypes about Italian cunning. The same policy produced incompatible accusations, all confidently recorded. The Queen Mother could lose a council vote and recover. Losing the story of why the vote happened was harder. This is where source boundaries matter. Diplomatic reports are valuable, but diplomats had limited access and instructions of their own. Chroniclers preserve detail, but they selected events through religious, political, and gendered assumptions. Pamphlets reveal what opponents wanted people to believe as readily as they reveal what happened inside closed rooms. The record is not useless. It is uneven. When a source claims a royal mother dominated the king, we must ask what domination meant. Did she issue instructions? Recommend appointments? Control access? Persuade her son? Speak in council? Refuse to disappear after he reached adulthood? Sometimes the answer may be extensive political control. Sometimes domination means that a woman remained visible where her enemies wanted her silent. The accusation could also protect adult sons from responsibility. A king who followed his mother's advice still made a royal decision. Hostile accounts often reduced him to a passive child and enlarged her into the sole author of policy. That made the mother responsible for both too much and too little. If the king seemed weak, she had weakened him. If he acted violently, she had corrupted him. If he rejected her advice, she had lost control. If he accepted it, she had stolen his independence. There was no safe interpretation because the story's usefulness did not depend upon fairness. By now, the appointment list has become part of a character. Every loyal servant proves manipulation. Every foreign relative proves disloyalty. Every private meeting proves conspiracy. Every public appearance proves ambition. She can dismiss servants, reduce the household, and retreat from council. Retreat creates another story. She has been defeated, exposed, or abandoned. A hostile report leaves the palace in a leather case. It crosses a border and is copied into correspondence. The Queen Mother's own explanation may remain in a drawer, if it was ever written. The woman sitting near the throne is slowly replaced by the version her enemies have described. Soon, the danger will no longer be merely that the court distrusts her. It will be that the court has learned which words make distrust sound like duty. Distrust becomes duty very quickly when enough powerful people benefit from it. A minister who wants the Queen Mother's influence reduced no longer needs to say that he dislikes her. Personal dislike sounds small. He can say that he is defending the king's independence, restoring proper government, protecting ancient custom, reducing household expense, or preventing private influence from replacing public counsel. The language becomes cleaner as the struggle becomes more dangerous. A dismissed servant is described as reform. A reduced allowance becomes financial discipline. A locked entrance becomes protection for the sovereign. A mother separated from her son becomes evidence that the king has finally begun to rule. This is the point where the story changes. Until now, it may seem that the danger came from unusually ambitious women, unusually cruel courts, or unusually violent periods. It is tempting to imagine that a more modest queen mother could have avoided the problem by remaining quiet, choosing fewer allies, and offering advice only when politely invited. That solution sounds sensible. It also fails almost immediately. A royal mother without allies cannot guarantee access to her son. She cannot protect the attendants carrying messages, challenge officials who filter information, or respond when another faction places its people around the king. Silence does not create neutral government. It leaves the available space to someone else. Imagine a morning when she decides not to interfere. She remains in her apartments. The council meets without her. The tutor, chosen by a powerful minister, presents the king with a report. A guard commander, loyal to another household, controls the corridor. A clerk places certain petitions on top of the pile and leaves others for tomorrow. Nothing dramatic occurs. No sword is drawn. By evening, 3 decisions have been made that reduce her income. Transfer 1 trusted attendant and promote a nobleman who once questioned her son's succession. Restraint has been interpreted as consent. The following morning, acting is harder. This was the first half of the trap. She needed enough authority to prevent the king from being captured politically by another household, minister, military faction, or royal relative. The second half was worse. Every tool she used to prevent that capture made her look as though she were capturing him herself. She appointed loyal people because she feared disloyal ones. Opponents pointed to the appointments as proof of a private regime. She watched access because the ruler was vulnerable. They said she isolated him. She gave advice because he lacked experience. They said he had no will of his own. She gathered information because the court concealed things from her. They said she maintained spies. There was no safe setting on the machine. Low power made her irrelevant. Moderate power made her suspicious. High power made her removable. Complete retirement could make her defenseless. History is occasionally generous enough to offer 4 bad options and then criticize the person who chooses one. This was not a measurable contest for the single deadliest occupation in history. It was something more useful to understand, one of the least stable positions in any royal court, because survival demanded opposite behavior at the same time. The danger did not come only from bad people. Courts were filled with ordinary people responding to incentives, fears, debts, family obligations, ambitions, and uncertain futures. A minister might sincerely believe maternal influence threatened orderly government. The Queen Mother might sincerely believe the same minister intended to control her son. Both could be correct about the other. The office generated conflict because it placed 2 forms of legitimacy beside one another. The king possessed dynastic and sovereign authority. His mother possessed seniority, intimacy, memory, and often practical experience. She remembered the succession crisis. She knew which officials had hesitated. She knew which servants had remained loyal when the palace gates were uncertain. She may have negotiated the alliances that kept her son alive long enough to wear the crown. Then, as government stabilized, the value of that memory became uncomfortable. The court wanted continuity without permanent dependence. It wanted her experience during emergencies, but not necessarily her judgment after the emergency was declared over. Emergencies do not end at the same moment for everyone. A minister with a secure office can announce that normal government has returned. A royal mother whose safety depends upon the guards outside her rooms may notice that the new normal places those guards under someone else's command. A king approaching adulthood can see his mother's household as an old support that now restricts him. She may see the same household as the reason he survived to become independent. No invented hatred is necessary. The structure provides enough friction. Now look again at the seat near the throne. At the beginning, it was placed there because the king was young. His mother's presence reassured the court. She could explain, translate, remember, and steady him. Years pass. The seat remains. Furniture becomes constitutional theory. Officials begin measuring the distance between the two places. Does she speak before the king? Do petitioners look toward her after he answers? Does he pause until she nods? Do instructions from her household function as commands? A gesture that looked protective when he was 10 can look humiliating when he is 20. She may reduce her visible presence. Ministers visit her privately instead. That can make matters worse. Public authority at least has witnesses. Private influence produces rumours. Attend council openly. And opponents call it domination. Remain away and write letters, and they call it conspiracy. Advise the king directly, and they say she commands him. Speak through ministers, and they say she hides behind favourites. The suspicion survives every method. This helps explain the persistent image of the secretive Queen Mother. The office often forced women into indirect methods because direct sovereignty was unavailable or unacceptable. Those methods were then used as evidence that their power was improper. A male ruler could command because the institution named him ruler. His mother often had to persuade, arrange, recommend, delay, introduce, protect, or refuse. Her authority operated through verbs that sounded smaller. The effects could be enormous. Records may preserve the king's order while omitting the conversation that produced it. They may record the dismissal of an attendant without explaining that she had carried information between mother and son. They may call the royal mother's supporters a faction, while treating the minister's faction as government itself. Even the archive can sit unevenly in the room. None of this means every queen mother was a victim of unfair description. Some overreached. Some protected corrupt relatives. Some helped sustain destructive policies. Some treated the king's adulthood as an inconvenience rather than an inevitable transfer. But overreach must be measured against actual choices. How much withdrawal was safe? How much intervention was necessary? At what moment did protection become control? There was no neutral official standing above the palace with a ruler and a clipboard. The answer came from whoever won. That is the midpoint of the story. The dangerous Queen Mother was not an accident appearing in several unrelated courts. She was the predictable result of systems that required maternal authority during weakness and distrusted it during recovery. The office needed her powerful. The dynasty needed her to deny it. And just as an experienced mother was told to step back, another woman was often moving closer to the centre. The mother of the king's own child. The place near the throne had not disappeared. It was about to have two claimants. The place near the throne now had two claimants. One possessed experience. The other possessed motherhood in its most immediate form. In 1648, the Ottoman throne passed to Mehmed IV, a child of about 6. His father, Sultan Ibrahim, had been removed and killed during severe political instability. The boy inherited an empire surrounded by officials, soldiers, palace servants, and rival interests that had already learned how quickly a reign could end. His mother was Turhan Sultan, but the most experienced royal mother in the palace was not Turhan. It was Kösem Sultan, the young ruler's grandmother. Kösem had lived near the centre of Ottoman dynastic politics for decades. She had been the consort of Sultan Ahmed I and the mother of two later sultans, Murad IV and Ibrahim. She had watched sons reach the throne, seen governments form around them, and survived political changes that removed people with far stronger formal positions. Turhan possessed the relationship the new reign was expected to elevate. She was the reigning child's mother. Kösem possessed the network that still made the palace function. In an orderly court, those facts might have produced a neat arrangement. The experienced grandmother could advise. The young mother could protect the child. Ministers could govern cooperatively until Mehmed grew older. This was not an orderly court. Royal households do not become less political because everyone involved is related. At first, Kösem's experience made her useful. The government needed someone who understood officials, military factions, court procedure, and the dangers surrounding a child ruler. Turhan was young and had not yet built an independent network equal to Kösem's. The grandmother remained close to power. That solved one immediate problem and created another. The reigning sultan's mother held the biological and dynastic connection that should have placed her at the center of his household. Yet the senior woman beside her possessed relationships built across several reigns. Guards, officials, attendants, and petitioners had years of reasons to approach Kösem. The palace now contained two maternal centers. One had the child, the other had the machine. The conflict is sometimes flattened into a familiar story about two jealous women competing inside a harem. That version is easy to remember and nearly useless for understanding what happened. The real struggle involved households. A royal household contained attendants, messengers, guards, financial officers, clients, and links to people beyond the private apartments. Each woman's safety depended upon people who could carry information, control entrances, recognize danger, and act before the opposing side did. This was not an argument over who sat closer at dinner. It concerned which network would surround the sovereign. Imagine the palace at night. Lamps burn low along a corridor. The young sultan sleeps behind guarded rooms. An attendant carrying folded linen is stopped and questioned because she has used a passage associated with the other household. A guard who has been awake since the previous evening rubs his eyes and waits for a replacement that has not arrived. A message moves from one apartment to another. Someone knows something. One faction believes must remain private. Another person has been promised protection for revealing it. The message may contain only a few sentences. Its route can decide who lives until morning. Accounts of Kösem's final conflict contain dramatic allegations. Some describe a plan to remove Mehmed and replace him with another prince, whose mother would be easier for Kösem to control. Other details concern warnings passed to Turhan's supporters and preparations made inside the palace. These narratives were shaped by factional victory, later retelling, and the desire to explain an extraordinary killing through a clear conspiracy. It is safer to hold tightly to what the evidence supports. By 1651, the households around Kösem and Turhan had become opposing political centers. Turhan's supporters believed Kösem threatened the young sultan and their own position. Kösem's continued authority threatened to leave the reigning child's mother permanently subordinate inside her son's palace. One side moved. Kösem was killed inside the palace in September 1651. There is no need to linger over physical detail. The important image is the reversal. For years, Kösem's rooms had been places where information arrived, favors were requested, and protection was negotiated. On the final night, one entrance that had long opened for her people no longer did. The same pathways that carried authority toward her carried danger in the opposite direction. Seniority did not save her. Experience did not save her. The servants around her could not all be trusted, and the guards around a royal household belonged only as long as the winning coalition agreed that they did. Turhan's victory does not prove that she personally designed every event preserved in later accounts, nor does it reduce the conflict to youth defeating age. It means that the household attached directly to the reigning child defeated the older network that had overshadowed it. The place near the throne changed occupants. Now Turhan faced the problem Kösem had faced. Winning control of access did not teach a young queen mother how to govern an empire. Removing a rival did not remove military unrest, financial pressure, administrative weakness, or the demands of a court expecting decisions. Turhan had secured her position. She still needed officials. She still needed soldiers. She still needed information from people whose loyalty might last only as long as their appointments. And Kösem's death left a warning inside the palace. A royal mother could be removed when her household became weaker than the coalition opposing it. Private rank offered no final immunity. The language of defending the young sultan could justify action against a woman accused of controlling him. Turhan could use that lesson. She also had to live inside it. Over time, she developed a more established role and worked through senior statesmen rather than attempting to perform every function personally. That was not withdrawal from politics, it was adaptation. Selecting capable officials, allowing them room to act, and preserving influence without making every decision appear to emerge from her rooms. The distinction mattered. Kösem's long experience had made her difficult to separate from the governments around several rulers. Turhan's survival depended partly upon building a structure in which her authority could support government without appearing to replace the sovereign forever. No arrangement was perfectly safe. A powerful minister could become a rival centre. A military faction could change allegiance. A growing ruler could reject the people chosen during his childhood. But after 1651, Turhan had something she previously lacked. Her household no longer stood beneath another maternal household. The audience list, the messengers, the guards, and the child ruler now pointed toward the same political centre. That alignment had been purchased through a palace death. Among the attendants, one fact mattered more than any jewelled title. The message had not stayed secret. The message had not stayed secret. In another court, far from Istanbul, secrecy failed in a different way. Not because an attendant carried a warning through a dark passage, but because the men threatened by a royal woman's authority no longer needed to hide what they intended to do. Strictly speaking, Mahd-e Olyā had not yet become the mother of a reigning Shah. She was the wife of Shah Muhammad Khudabanda and the mother of princes whose futures depended upon the court she was trying to control. Her story belongs here because it reveals how the danger could begin before the position of Queen Mother was officially hers. Safavid Iran in the late 16th century was governed through a difficult balance. The Shah stood at the centre, but powerful Qizilbash leaders commanded forces, held offices, controlled regions, and expected their role in the dynasty to be respected. Court politics moved through that military structure. When Muhammad Khudabanda came to the throne in 1578, his authority was limited by poor eyesight, factional pressure, and the strength of competing Qizilbash leaders. Mahd-e Olyā entered the uncertainty as an active political force. She supported particular officials, intervened in appointments, and attempted to strengthen royal control over men accustomed to treating the state as something they had helped create and therefore possessed a right to divide. Her power came through the dynasty. Her danger came through the same route. Mahd-e Olyā was the Shah's wife and the mother of Crown Prince Hamza Mirza, as well as the mother of Abbas, a future Shah. Those relationships gave her access, status, and a direct interest in preserving the central authority her sons might inherit. If military factions became too independent, they did not merely weaken her husband. They threatened the future of her children. From her position, intervention could look like dynastic defense. To powerful Qizilbash leaders, it looked like an attempt to reduce their influence, remove allies, and place government under a royal household they could not control. The conflict was not simply male offence at a woman with opinions. Gender shaped the language and intensity of opposition, but the struggle also concerned offices, commands, provincial power, wealth, and access to the Shah. People were not risking their lives over etiquette. They were risking them over government. Imagine an audience chamber where a military leader enters expecting the deference attached to his rank. He has soldiers outside the capital, relatives in office, and a history of service to the dynasty. Dust remains on his boots from the road. He expects negotiation. Instead, he discovers that Mahd-e Olyā has already spoken. An appointment has changed. A rival has been promoted. A demand has been refused. The Shah listens, but the decision appears settled before the commander reaches the room. No one needs to insult him openly. The arrangement itself is the insult. Every official she supported suggested that an opposing commander might be next to lose authority. Every effort to strengthen the crown appeared to confirm that she intended to govern through her husband, and eventually, through her sons. The Shah's weakness sharpened the problem. A forceful ruler might impose appointments and make resistance appear to be rebellion against him. When authority seemed uncertain, opponents could claim that his wife had captured royal decision-making. They could oppose her, while presenting themselves as defenders of proper kingship. Remove the woman, and call the removal restoration. Mahd-e Olyā also faced the problem of family protection. Her sons' futures depended upon a court where military factions could influence succession. Strengthening them required weakening men who might prefer another arrangement. Doing so made those men more likely to act first. Protection created urgency. Urgency created appointments. Appointments created a coalition. The surviving accounts describe mounting hostility between Mahd-e Olyā and leading Qizilbash figures. She pressed policies and personnel choices that challenged their interests. They came to regard her removal as necessary. At that point, the most important question was not whether she recognized the danger. It was whether the Shah would protect her. Royal intimacy creates a powerful illusion. The wife shares the ruler's household. The mother protects his heirs. Her authority seems to flow from a relationship ministers and commanders cannot duplicate. But intimacy is not an army. It is not a gate. It is not a command armed men will necessarily obey. When the ruler is politically weak, family connection may protect less than it promises. In 1579, Qizilbash leaders moved against Mahd-e Olyā. The historical record indicates that the Shah approved, accepted, or failed to prevent the killing. That final point changes the meaning of the room. The threat did not arrive from outside the dynasty. The man whose authority helped make her powerful did not save her from the coalition determined to end that power. We should not invent a private scene. We do not know exactly what husband and wife said before the decision. We should not place a death order in his hand or create a final conversation the evidence does not provide. What remains visible is the political result. The Shah allowed the removal of a woman who had acted forcefully within his government and in the interest of their dynastic household. Her position had become more dangerous to his immediate survival than her destruction. This is the brutal limit of power borrowed from another person's crown. A royal mother can help construct the government around a weak ruler. She can defend the dynasty, challenge military factions, and promote officials loyal to the center. If resistance becomes strong enough, the ruler may choose accommodation with the men holding weapons. Authority he once allowed her to exercise can then be presented as the reason she must disappear. The Qizilbash leaders did not eliminate factional politics by killing Mahd-e Olyā. They changed the balance within it. The court remained divided. The dynasty remained vulnerable. Offices still had to be filled. Commanders still managed, and the crown prince still lived inside the system his mother had tried to control. Removing one powerful woman did not repair the state. It removed one center of resistance. Later accounts can make political killing appear corrective. The troublesome advisor is gone. The palace returns to order. Men resume their proper offices. But order for whom? For the commanders whose positions are safer? For the Shah, who exchanged a forceful political partner for temporary accommodation? For the sons whose mother was removed before the struggle over their future ended? Now return to the appointment chamber. A royal woman supports one official and removes another. She believes she is strengthening the throne. Excluded men gather. They describe her authority as illegitimate. They persuade the ruler that stability requires sacrifice. The final instrument may not be a sword at first. It may be permission. A nod, an agreement not to intervene, a guard who receives no order to protect her. The authority that once raised her above the court withdraws beneath her without warning. After Mahd-e Olyā's death, the men who demanded her removal remained beside a Shah who had just shown them how little protection royal intimacy could provide. Royal intimacy had failed to protect Mahd-e Olyā. In the Kingdom of Benin, in what is now southern Nigeria, another court gave maternal authority a more durable form. Instead of pretending that the king's mother had no political place, the court gave that place a name. Ioba, Queen Mother. The title did not make danger disappear. No title has ever managed that. But it altered the structure of the problem. A mother's authority no longer had to exist only as a temporary shadow cast by a young or vulnerable ruler. It could become an office with rank, residence, staff, ceremony, and memory. The figure most closely associated with that transformation is Idia, mother of Oba Esiji, who ruled Benin in the early 16th century. The surviving history comes through Benin court traditions, royal artworks, later accounts, and scholarship interpreting them. Those sources credit Idia with supporting her son during struggles surrounding his accession and with advising him during conflicts that threatened the kingdom. They also remember forms of medicinal and spiritual knowledge associated with royal protection. We should not turn those traditions into a modern military report. The details do not survive with the neatness of a clerk recording troop numbers in a ledger. The political meaning is clear. Hasiji's mother was remembered as essential to his success. That memory became an institution. Imagine the period after a ruler has secured his position. Messengers arrive with news from beyond the city. Chiefs stand according to rank. Court officials decide how to recognize a woman whose counsel and protection have become part of the Oba's own legitimacy. In many courts, the reward might have been jewelry, income, or more impressive rooms. Benin created a title. As Ioba, Idia received substantial political privileges. The Queen Mother possessed a separate residence and staff, and held a status comparable to a senior chief. Later, Iobas occupied an important place within the political hierarchy of the court. The separate residence matters. It was not simply a comfortable house for the ruler's mother after a difficult career. Her residence meant attendants, messengers, resources, ritual obligations, and a recognized place from which authority could operate. The household had not vanished. It had been acknowledged. For once, maternal power did not have to pretend it was merely visiting. The office had a recognized address. That changed the accusation surrounding royal motherhood. Elsewhere, opponents could point to attendants and ask why a private woman had constructed a political machine. In Benin, the Ioba's establishment could be part of the accepted arrangement of royal government. Giving maternal authority a title made it harder to dismiss as an accident. It also made the boundaries easier to draw. The Ioba's position was connected to protection. The welfare of the Oba was tied to the welfare of the kingdom. A queen mother who guarded, advised, or ritually protected her son therefore served a purpose larger than private affection. Her relationship to the ruler could be presented as public security. That did not mean every decision she made was welcomed. It did not mean every later Ioba possessed identical influence. Institutions change with rulers, crises, personalities, and the balance of people around them. An office provides legitimacy. It also defines expectations. Enter the Ioba's palace. Attendants move through rooms carrying messages, food, choral regalia, and objects intended for ceremony. One worker has spent the morning checking stored goods. Another waits in a shaded passage with a message that must be delivered to the Oba's court. A visitor understands that this is not the apartment of a retired widow. He is approaching a titled figure within the kingdom's hierarchy. Elsewhere, a brass caster prepares a model in wax. Clay is applied. Metal will eventually preserve the high beaded crown associated with a queen mother. The finished commemorative head is not a modern portrait intended to capture an ordinary facial expression. It serves royal memory. After an Ioba's death, an altar could preserve her presence through cast brass sculpture and carved ivory. Authority did not simply end when the woman died, it entered the ritual life of the dynasty. That is a profound contrast with courts, where a politically active royal mother could be removed and then flattened by hostile writing. Benin court art could present her as protector, titled authority, and ancestor. An image associated with Idia appeared on ivory pendant masks made for royal use. The Oba could wear such an image during ceremonies concerned with protection and royal power. The mother's face did not remain hidden in a domestic room. It travelled on the ruler's body. The symbolism is difficult to miss. The king displays authority while carrying the image of the woman whose protection helped make that authority possible. This does not reverse the hierarchy. The Ioba does not become the Oba. Her power remains related to her son and to the royal institution he embodies. But the relationship is no longer treated as something that must be denied. Proximity becomes part of kingship's public language. Institutional recognition still came with limits. The Queen Mother's separate palace honoured her, but it also placed her in a defined location. Rank created privileges and obligations. Ritual responsibility elevated her, while prescribing the forms her authority should take. An office protects power by giving it rules. Rules also make power easier to contain. The Ioba's influence remained tied to the dynasty, to her son's position, and to court structures that could change. A title could not erase succession, faction, or disagreement. It could make maternal authority less dependent upon pretending that it was not authority at all. A harder question remains. Who decided when the king's mother had become the Ioba? How much of Idia's exceptional authority could later women truly inherit? The evidence does not permit one simple answer across every reign. The office survived, but offices never reproduce a founder's exact circumstances. One woman may inherit the title without inheriting the same crisis, relationships, or personal influence. That uncertainty is part of the history. The title created continuity. It could not guarantee equality between the women who held it. Return for a moment to the dark Ottoman corridor, where Kösem's household collided with Turhan's, or to the Safavid court, where armed leaders removed Mahd-e Olyā. In those settings, a royal woman's network could be described as an intrusion into government. In Benin, the network had a palace, staff, duties, and symbols recognized by the political order. The servants had an institution to serve. The institution had a place in ceremony. The ceremony carried memory beyond one lifetime. A commemorative head placed on an ancestral altar did not merely say that a king once had a mother. It said the kingdom remembered her as a political and protective presence worthy of material permanence. The chair had become an office. That made it harder to erase. It also made it easier to define. Definition could be a form of protection. In Chosån Korea, authority accumulated through seniority, ritual rank, written precedent, and the repeated discovery that certain crises could not be resolved without the most senior royal woman in the palace. The Queen Dowager occupied a difficult position. She belongs to the royal household, not to the male official hierarchy stuffing the state. Yet she could possess dynastic authority those officials could not manufacture for themselves. She might be the widow of a former king, the mother or grandmother of the reigning ruler, and the person best placed to speak for continuity when succession became uncertain. Her power did not always look like a command issued across a council table. Sometimes it looked like one messenger walking across a courtyard. He begins in a hall occupied by senior officials. They have gathered because the king has died without leaving a simple path forward. Genealogies are examined. Princes are discussed. Ritual obligations must be observed. The state requires a successor, but the choice must appear lawful, dynastic, and orderly. No official can point toward his preferred candidate and declare the matter finished. Across the palace sits the Queen Dowager. Her hall belongs to the inner royal domain. The officials cannot enter as though visiting a colleague. Rank, gendered space, ceremony, and dynastic etiquette structure the exchange. A question is written. The messenger receives it with both hands. He crosses the courtyard while cold air moves beneath his sleeves. At the next hall, attendants take the document inside. He waits near a wall, careful not to lean against it, while the senior royal woman considers a decision that will change the kingdom. An answer returns. He carries it back across the same stones. A few lines of formal language can contain the future king's name. The scene appears restrained. No one storms a gate. No queen mother places a crown on her own head. Yet the dynasty changes because the highest officials and the senior royal woman negotiate through architecture, ritual, and paper. This is authority made visible without becoming kingship. Queen Dowager Chonghi provides an important early example. During the succession that brought King Songjon to the throne in 1469, senior officials looked to her to make the decisive dynastic choice. Her place within the royal household allowed her to identify a successor when the state required more than administrative knowledge. The officials understood procedure, precedent, and the political landscape. She carried the household seniority that could turn one candidate into an accepted continuation of the royal line. Neither side operated alone. It would be misleading to imagine the Queen Dowager commanding silent officials who merely awaited her pleasure. It would be equally misleading to treat her as a ceremonial widow, approving a decision already made by men. The process worked through negotiation. Officials framed the problem. The Dowager Queen supplied dynastic authority. The messenger carried the gap between them. A decision emerged that each side could describe as proper. This gave Chosŏn queen dowagers a source of strength different from the private influence condemned in other courts. Precedent could support them. Earlier actions by senior royal women became examples later generations might cite. The record could say, "This had been done before." Those are comforting words in a crisis. They are also dangerous words, because every precedent enlarges the possible meaning of the next one. A queen dowager who selected a successor under exceptional conditions might become evidence that another could supervise a regency. A written royal instruction could authorize her to oversee a young ruler. A temporary solution could gradually become an accepted constitutional possibility. Not a certainty, a possibility. Political institutions often grow through possibilities that survive long enough to become difficult to deny. Later Chosŏn courts called one formal version of female regency Suryom Chongjong, government heard from behind a screen. The screen did not make the dowager queen invisible. Everyone in the room knew she was there. Officials presented matters. Documents were read. Questions crossed the partition. Decisions moved outward in the young king's name. The arrangement expressed the contradiction perfectly. Present but separated. Powerful but ritually contained. Necessary but not sovereign. A piece of fabric was being asked to solve constitutional tension. History has placed heavier responsibilities on less attractive furniture, but not many. The screen did more than observe gendered expectations. It gave authority a recognized form. It told officials where the dowager queen could sit, how communication would occur, and how her participation could be reconciled with a political order centered on male kingship. That protection came with limits. A written instruction could authorize action, but opponents might debate its meaning. Precedent could defend a regency, but officials could argue that current circumstances differed. Ritual seniority made the queen dowager's voice necessary, while bureaucratic procedure shaped how that voice entered policy. The household and official administration had to coexist. The palace had court ladies, attendants, messengers, relatives, and people who understood the inner royal domain. The bureaucracy had ministers, censors, secretaries, and scholars trained to treat procedure as a moral universe. Each could regard the other with suspicion. Officials might fear household influence would distort public government. The queen dowager might fear officials were using procedure to isolate the young ruler and reduce royal authority. Both concerns could contain truth. A regent who ignored officials risked governing through a narrow circle. Officials who excluded the household risked turning a child king into a seal attached to bureaucratic decisions. The messenger walks again. A court lady places a question in his hands. A secretary converts the reply into formal language. A minister objects to one phrase. The document returns for revision. Nothing looks dramatic enough for palace legend. Yet this is how authority survives, through repetition, correction, and people willing to keep carrying paper across the courtyard. The work has a body. The messenger's fingers are cold. The secretary bends over the desk until his neck aches. An attendant waits behind the screen for hours, while officials debate wording on the other side. The Queen Dowager's authority is not an abstract cloud. It is produced through their labour. This arrangement still creates enemies. A dowager who supports one royal branch may alienate another. Officials promoted during her regency become associated with her household. Later factions judge old decisions through new interests. And once the young king matures, the familiar expiration problem returns. When should the regency end? Who decides he is ready? Can the Queen Dowager withdraw without abandoning officials and policies formed under her protection? Can the king establish independence without humiliating the senior woman whose authority stabilized his reign? Precedent can guide the beginning. It cannot remove the human struggle at the end. The Chosŏn example does not offer a safe version of maternal power. It offers a more institutional one. The danger moves away from an unguarded bedroom and into procedure, moral accusation, factional memory, and the interpretation of documents. The Dowager Queen may be less exposed to sudden palace violence than Kösem or Mahd-e Olyā, yet her authority still depends upon dynasty, age, crisis, and the ruler she helps sustain. The messenger returns to the officials one final time. They unfold the answer. By the time the ink dries, a woman who cannot become king has helped decide who will. The ink dries. The chosen ruler is still young. For a time, everyone agrees that guidance is necessary. Documents pass through familiar hands. The Queen Mother or Dowager speaks with the authority of age, crisis, and service already performed. Then the child grows taller. His voice changes. Tutors begin addressing him as a ruler rather than a pupil. Ambassadors watch his face instead of glancing toward the senior woman nearby. Ministers who once praised maternal wisdom discover an equally deep respect for royal independence. The regency has entered its most dangerous stage. A queen mother is expected to prepare her son to govern. She must teach judgment, surround him with capable people, protect him from factions, and prevent the state from collapsing during his youth. If she succeeds, she creates a king who no longer needs her. If she fails, she may create a king too weak to protect either of them. There is no ceremony that makes the transfer perfectly clean. A birthday may mark legal adulthood. A proclamation may declare the regency finished. The king may begin signing documents without supervision. Habits do not obey proclamations. Officials who have spent years visiting his mother's rooms do not forget the route overnight. Servants appointed through her household remain in place. Ministers owe careers to decisions made during her regency. The king may sit alone on the throne while half his government still carries her fingerprints. To him, that can feel less like continuity and more like occupation. She sees the same people differently. These are the officials who preserved order, paid the army, negotiated with dangerous nobles, and kept the crown on his head. Dismissing them merely to prove independence could dismantle the structure that made independent rule possible. So she advises patience. He hears delay. She warns him about a courtier. He hears distrust of his judgment. She reminds him what happened during the succession crisis. He hears a story in which he remains the frightened child behind a guarded room. Neither needs to hate the other. The institution has already provided enough irritation. France offered a clear example in the early 17th century. When Henry IV was assassinated in 1610, his son Louis XIII was 9 years old. Louis's mother, Mahd de Medici, became regent and governed through the years of his minority. Her government developed its own ministers, alliances, and favourites. Most prominent among them was Concino Concini, an Italian courtier whose rise became a focus for hostility. His offices and influence made him useful to Marie and intolerable to many French nobles. Louis grew up inside that arrangement. He was king in title from childhood, but his mother and the government around her made the major decisions. Even after the formal end of his minority, the network did not dissolve. The young king now faced a familiar problem. To prove that he possessed authority, he needed more than a crown. He needed to demonstrate that the people who had governed during his childhood could no longer govern over him. Small signs came first. Council hours changed without Marie being consulted. Documents that once passed through her apartments went directly to the king. Visitors waited in her antechamber and discovered that no answer would come because the men they needed were elsewhere. A servant arranged chairs for an audience that was quietly cancelled. The room remained prepared long after the guests stopped arriving. In April 1617, the break became violent and public. Officers acting for Louis XIII killed Concini at the Louvre as the young king seized control of his own government. Marie was removed from power and sent to the chateau at Blois. The change was sudden enough to feel like a curtain dropping between scenes. On one side, the Queen Mother stood near the centre of government. On the other, her son had demonstrated independence by destroying the political structure of his childhood. The violence should not be reduced to a young man escaping an overbearing mother. Concini had powerful enemies. Noble rivalry, policy disputes, foreign connections, and the ambitions of Louis's companions shaped the coup. But its public meaning was unmistakable. The king had become king by removing his mother's government. Marie's experience no longer appeared as protection. It appeared as obstruction. Her favourite was no longer a minister serving the crown. He became the man said to have prevented the sovereign from ruling. The royal mother's household, once justified by emergency, became evidence that the emergency had been extended for her benefit. Blois offered Marie rooms, walls, attendants, and very little control. Exile inside a castle remained exile. She had once influenced who approached the king. Now distance decided whether her letters reached him with any force. The guarded route had changed from her instrument into her confinement. Marie did not accept political retirement quietly. She escaped from Blois in 1619 with aristocratic support and became involved in renewed opposition before reaching a reconciliation with her son. Even reconciliation did not solve the original problem. A queen mother could return to court. She could recover ceremony, income, and a measure of influence. She could not make the king young again. Louis now had advisors of his own. Among them rose Cardinal Richelieu, whose relationship with mother and son became another struggle over policy and access. Marie later tried to have him removed. During the crisis remembered as the Day of the Dupes in 1630, she believed his position had collapsed. It had not. Louis chose Richelieu. Marie lost again and spent her final years away from the centre of French power. Her story shows that a regency does not always end in one clean transfer. It may unfold through legal majority, political coup, exile, reconciliation, renewed conflict, and final defeat. At each stage, the mother has to judge how far to withdraw. Retreat too early, and enemies dismantle her network before her son is secure. Remain too long, and the son concludes that independence requires her removal. People around them have reasons to sharpen the disagreement. A young king's favourite gains power when the mother's servants lose it. Ministers excluded during the regency return as champions of adult monarchy. Old clients urge the Queen Mother not to abandon them because their futures depend upon her continued influence. A family disagreement arrives with payrolls, armed followers, and foreign policy. Not every king staged a coup. Not every mother ended in exile. Some negotiated withdrawal. Some remained respected advisors. Some transferred authority gradually and preserved influence by becoming less visible. That required discipline. She had to stop answering questions people still brought to her. Servants had to surrender routes they controlled for years. Officials had to learn that a familiar nod no longer carried the same weight. The king had to distinguish independence from automatic destruction of everything built during childhood. Back in the throne room, the chairs have shifted. The king signs without looking sideways. His mother sits farther away, perhaps in another residence, perhaps nowhere in the room. The distance is supposed to prove that he has grown. For her, it proves something colder. She spent years teaching him to hold power firmly enough that no one could take it from him. Now he is holding it firmly enough to take it from her. Removal does not always arrive with an arrest at the palace gate. Sometimes it begins with a second signature. An order that once left the Queen Mother's rooms now requires approval from a minister appointed by the adult king. The change sounds procedural. The paper still moves. The seal still appears. But her instruction has become a request. Next comes the allowance. A treasurer opens the household ledger and announces that expenses must be reduced. A line for additional guards disappears. A planned journey is postponed. Gifts become less generous. Repairs wait. No one says the Queen Mother is being politically disarmed. They say the roof will have to last another winter. Then the guards change. Men who once received instructions from her steward now report to a royal officer. Their clothing looks the same. They stand in the same corridor. Yet when one of her messengers arrives after dark, the answer has changed. His name is not on the list. Administrative erosion is often safer than public confrontation. An open attack can frighten allies, provoke sympathy, or make the king appear ungrateful. Small reductions look responsible. One privilege disappears, then another. The apartments remain, but fewer people have reason to visit them. The Queen Mother can resist. She may summon old clients, write to provincial supporters, remind the king of services performed during childhood, or appeal to custom and family duty. If she still controls money, information, or loyal officers, resistance can force negotiation. It can also confirm the accusation that she will never surrender authority voluntarily. This is why the end of maternal power becomes a test of timing. The woman who withdraws before anyone demands it may preserve dignity, income, and access. The woman who remains one season too long can be treated as a threat. The difficulty is knowing which season she is in. Courts rarely send a clear notice. They send empty corridors. The servants go next. A chamber attendant is transferred to another household. A secretary is pensioned off. A messenger who once crossed the palace freely receives a provincial assignment far from the capital. These changes are described individually. Together, they remove memory. The Queen Mother loses people who know which officials hesitated during the succession, which promises were made, and which entrance can be used when the formal route is blocked. The workers lose more than employment. A servant who spent years sleeping close enough to hear a bell in the night may have built an entire household around royal wages. When the faction changes, she can be sent away with little explanation. The records are more likely to preserve the name of the minister who ordered the dismissal than the worker who packed her clothing. The political machine becomes lighter by transferring its cost downward. Confinement may follow. A royal woman does not need a dungeon to lose freedom. A palace, chateau, convent, country estate, or assigned residence can become a beautiful form of imprisonment. She may retain attendants, clothing, meals, gardens, and ceremony while losing the ability to meet supporters without supervision. The windows are tall, the rooms are furnished, the entrance still opens only when someone else permits it. Confinement allows the dynasty to preserve appearances. The mother's body remains honoured. Her political movement does not. Exile works through distance. A letter that once crossed a corridor now crosses provinces, borders, and offices, where it may be opened, copied, delayed, or ignored. Supporters have to decide whether visiting her is worth being noticed. Exile can be comfortable by ordinary standards and devastating by court standards. A woman may live in a residence grander than most people will ever see and experience every meal as evidence that decisions are being made elsewhere. At court, absence produces its own story. Her rooms are reassigned. A new household uses the corridor once travelled by her messengers. Officials stop mentioning her because remembering the wrong person can delay a promotion. Political memory becomes remarkably efficient when salaries are involved. Some royal mothers were removed through violence. Kösem was killed when the coalition around Turhan and the young Mehmed IV prevailed. Mahd-e Olyā died after Kizilbash leaders decided her authority threatened their interests, and the Shah did not protect her. These deaths were political messages. Maternal rank did not place a woman beyond removal. Her son's crown did not create immunity. Years of service did not become armour. Violence ended the person, while leaving the machinery that generated conflict untouched. Ministers still needed access. Military factions still sought appointments. Young rulers still depended upon adults. Households continued competing. Other women survived by changing the form of their authority. They reduced public intervention, trusted experienced ministers, concentrated on ceremonial, charitable, dynastic, or religious functions, and allowed the king to appear unmistakably independent. This was not necessarily surrender. It could be sophisticated retreat, a word before council, a marriage recommendation, a warning delivered privately, a request framed as maternal concern rather than policy. Influence became narrower and harder to attack. Survival sometimes required allowing another person to receive the applause. That strategy had limits. An ambitious minister could use withdrawal to exclude her completely. A king might accept retreat and still remove the household. Former clients might pressure her to intervene because their own safety depended upon her return. Would stepping back have saved her? Or maybe left her undefended? There was no answer that worked in every court. The residence could be taken next. Moving the Queen Mother away from the centre slowed information and changed who encountered her casually. A walk of several rooms became a carriage journey. A familiar evening conversation required formal permission. The relationship between mother and son shifted from government to ceremony, while both remained alive. Fewer letters, shorter audiences, gifts on feast days instead of instructions every morning. A chair placed near the king for one public event and removed as soon as the observers leave. Some women found influence through the next generation. A grandmother might advise a new heir, supervise education, or provide continuity after another death. Experience unwelcome under an adult son could become useful when a young grandson appeared. That possibility created fresh suspicion. Retirement was never entirely innocent in a monarchy where every child represented another succession. The final thing removed might be the name. A queen mother can be honoured with funerals, tombs, portraits, foundations, gifts, or ancestral rites. Her household may preserve a favourable account. Enemies may write another. The monument emphasises dignity. The hostile chronicle emphasises interference. The family account emphasises sacrifice. The political opponent emphasises ambition. A woman who spent her life struggling over access to the king can lose access to her own story after death. She becomes a useful character, the schemer, the foreigner, the overbearing mother, the saintly protector, the victim, the secret ruler. Each label closes, questions the evidence should leave open. Was she defending her son or her household? Was there a meaningful difference when the household protected the son? Did she remain in power because she loved authority, feared enemies, owed allies, or believed the ruler was still vulnerable? The record may support part of an answer. It rarely supports the meekness of a legend. Now the palace entrance closes. Perhaps she stands behind it in confinement. Perhaps she has left for another residence. Perhaps workers are carrying objects from rooms she occupied for decades. The mechanism differs. The corridor shows the result. Petitioners no longer wait outside her apartments. The messenger passes without stopping. And inside the throne room, officials begin preparing the version of events that will explain why the woman once considered necessary became impossible to keep. The officials begin preparing the final version before the rooms are empty. A clerk sharpens a pen. A secretary compares dates. Someone decides which appointment marked the beginning of disorder, which dismissal restored stability, and which private conversation can safely be described as fact because the people most likely to object are no longer present. The palace has survived. That is how the story will be told. The king remains on the throne. The seal still presses wax into the shape of authority. Guards stand at familiar entrances. Petitioners continue arriving with requests folded into careful language. Only the woman near the throne has disappeared. Her absence makes the room look simpler. That simplicity is deceptive. Her power never belonged to one object, office, or secret passage. It grew from a problem the dynasty could not avoid. The child inherited authority before he inherited experience. A crisis required someone close enough to protect him. The court needed continuity, memory, loyalty, and access. His mother provided all four. Then the court had to decide what to do with the power it had asked her to use. This is why the position could become so dangerous. She was rarely permitted the clean ownership of authority. A king could point to a crown, law, lineage, and public language of sovereignty. His mother pointed to work already performed. She protected the heir. She remembered who stayed loyal. She kept the household functioning while the ruler was too young to understand why grown men were frightened. Service is a difficult foundation for permanent power. It depends upon memory, gratitude, and the continued belief that the emergency has not ended. Those things fade. The king grows. Ministers who once needed his mother gain experience of their own. New attendants replace old ones. A military commander dies. A favourite loses office. A son begins hearing the story of his childhood from men who insist he had been controlled. The past is rearranged around the needs of the present. In one version, his mother preserved the throne. In another, she delayed his independence. Both may contain truth. That is what made her position so uncomfortable. It was not merely a place of domination. It was a place of work. Reports had to be read, faces judged, rivalries remembered, household wages approved, petitions heard. Succession watched. Useful warnings separated from profitable panic. The work was often repetitive. A delayed payment, a disputed appointment, a letter from a province, an attendant accused of carrying information, a relative asking for one more favour that would apparently solve the kingdom forever. Most government did not look like conspiracy. It looked like paper arriving faster than anyone could answer it. Danger grew from the way ordinary work accumulated into extraordinary influence. One audience did not make her powerful. 1,000 audiences did. One recommendation did not create a faction. Years of appointments did. One closed route did not prove control. A palace that learned to wait for her approval did. Once those habits formed, neither mother nor son could end them without injuring someone. Officials who served her feared dismissal. Attendants who carried messages feared punishment. Relatives raised through her patronage feared returning to obscurity. The king feared appearing weak. His mother feared becoming defenseless. Everyone could describe personal fear as public duty. That was the machine beneath the family. A sudden death inside a palace may look like the most dramatic ending. A move to a distant residence can appear gentler. A formal office or regency precedent can seem safer. Each court drew the boundary differently. None completely removed the contradiction. The royal mother was powerful because she stood close to the ruler. She was endangered by every sign that she stood too close. Even affection could become political evidence. A long private conversation suggested influence. A disagreement suggested rivalry. A gift suggested favoritism. Silence suggested defeat. Royal families could not behave like ordinary families because nothing around them remained ordinary for long. A mother's advice changed an appointment. A son's irritation removed a minister. A household disagreement travelled outward as taxation, exile, military movement, or civil conflict. People farthest from the throne often paid for arguments they never heard. A farmer surrendered grain because a provincial official needed money after purchasing court support. A soldier waited for wages while competing households consumed revenue. A servant lost employment because a new faction required cleaner corridors and fewer witnesses. The place near the king cast a long shadow, yet the woman herself could vanish from it. Her words survive unevenly. Opponents often wrote more. Officials recorded what mattered to institutions. Diplomats repeated rumours that made foreign courts understandable. Later storytellers preferred poison, jealousy, and private manipulation because systems are less convenient than villains. The dangerous Queen Mother became a character. The court that required her became scenery. So the final room should remain quiet. No execution, no speech about destiny, no procession of famous women, only the ordinary beginning of another day. A servant opens the shutters. Light reaches the floor in long rectangles. Dust rises where officials will soon stand. A clerk places fresh documents on a table. The king enters, older now, and takes his seat. There is no need for him to look sideways. The smaller chair's being removed. Perhaps it was carried into storage. Perhaps it sits in another residence beside a cold fireplace. Perhaps the wood was reused. The record may not say. A cleaner will sweep the pale mark left on the floor. By noon, even the dust will stop showing where the legs once stood. Its absence tells the official story. The king rules alone. Order has returned. The court no longer needs the woman who once kept the roots open, remembered the dangers, and steadied the child beneath the crown. But the room cannot erase what her chair revealed. Sovereignty was never as solitary as the throne pretended. The king learned to rule inside a world built by other hands, nurses, tutors, guards, attendants, ministers, rivals, and the mother who had stood close enough to make herself necessary. That necessity was her power. Its expiration was her danger. Outside, another petition awaits. A message passes through the guarded entrance. Someone decides whether it should reach the king now or after supper. The machinery continues. Only the title of the person controlling the route has changed. In the open space beside the throne, where the smaller chair once stood. The palace preserves its final warning. The safest looking place in the palace had always been the most dangerous, close enough to power to protect it, and close enough for everyone to imagine it moving nearer.